The question asks us to evaluate the effectiveness of the progressive era reformers and the federal government in bringing about reform at the national level, and we'll be doing this by analyzing their successes and limitations. Whenever you're writing a DBQ, the first thing you always want to do is craft a compound and complex thesis. The thesis I'll be using states, although reform wasn't universal and comprehensive, the efforts of many reformers and the action taken by the federal government in the progressive era was extremely potent in bringing about reform at the national level. Now that we have a thesis to work with, this leads us to step number 1, which is to write out everything you know pertaining to the thesis in the question. It should take you roughly 2 minutes to compile the evidence before you start writing the rest of your DBQ. For example, this is some of the information I have written down. Now that we have information that we can talk about, let's begin. One trick you can use to demonstrate your knowledge about the material and that gains you instant credibility is by beginning your introduction with a quote from either a prominent historian or historical figure that encapsulates what you'll be talking about. For example, this is the quote I'll be using to kick off my introduction. Now that we have a hook, we need to put our argument into context. My context will be that the progressive era is preceded by what is commonly known as the Gilded Age, coined by Charles Dickens, a time marked by its presidential passivity towards big business such as Standard Oil, lack of women's rights due to the concept of separate spheres, segregation in the form of Jim Crow laws, political machines, lackluster consumer and workers' protections, and government corruption. All of this culminated into an unequal playing field. Now that we have a hook, context, and thesis completed, this is what it looks like all together. We can now move on from our introduction into our body paragraphs. The first body paragraph should focus on where reform was limited, whereas the second body paragraph should focus on where reform was successful. Now it's just a simple matter of dividing the information we wrote at the start into one of these categories. For example, the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th Amendments would all be examples of where reform was successful. On the other hand, the efforts by reformers such as Booker T. Washington and Webb Du Bois were limited as segregation still persisted, exemplified by Wilson's administration and Jim Crow laws. The populist Omaha platform would be limited as only some of their demands for reforms were met, whereas the trust busting was successful through acts such as the Interstate Commerce Act, the Sherman Antitrust Act, Hepburn Act, Clayton Antitrust Act, and so on. You are required to use 6 of the 7 documents for DBQs, but the trick is not to write about the documents, rather to write with them. It is best to incorporate the documents as complementary evidence that highlights the larger point you are trying to make. Take this document for example. Because you have a finite amount of time, it would be wasteful to read and analyze the document thoroughly, then write about it. All you have to do is figure out its message. Because the document is talking about the poor conditions of a meat packaging building, we can use it as complementary evidence with Upton Sinclair's book The Jungle and the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. This is how I would incorporate the document. Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, details the despicable and repugnant conditions found in the meat packaging industry. I could buy the Neil Reynolds report, which found that meat was being shoveled from filthy wooden floors and being pushed in raw box carts. In response, the government passed the Meat Inspection Act of 1906, along with the broader Pure Food and Drug Law of 1906. What we were able to do in 2 sentences was provide 4 pieces of outside evidence, use the document, and provide vivid imagery, all by simply incorporating the document instead of making it the focus. However, most importantly, it addresses the analysis and reasoning part of the rubric, because it explains the document's historical situation. It's a fast and streamlined way to get that point without having to delve into the point of view of the author, which can oftentimes be difficult to discern and time-consuming. If you do this for all the documents, you'll be in fine shape. Now, my final word of advice would be to incorporate a few higher-level words, such as manifest, nexus, and instrumental. Doing so will make your writing sound much more refined and intelligent. While the rubric doesn't explicitly say you need to, Doing so gives off the appearance that you have a complex understanding of the historical development that is the focus of the prompt. Additionally, incorporating as much historical lingo and dates throughout your essay as you can goes a long way to establishing that you know the material and therefore have a complex understanding. A side benefit being it will oftentimes count as evidence. For example, rather than saying news reporters will investigate corruption within big businesses, it would be better to say muckrakers would investigate corruption within big businesses. Congratulations, you are now going to get 100%. Something changing inside.